Hello, Long Beach. This is Marco speaking to you from the Arts District on behalf of the Arts Council for the City of Long Beach, and keep arts working. I am now going to hand over the Zoom to my friend, not this one, but this one here or there, Greggory Moore, and he will explain to you what you're about to witness. Hit it, Gregory.
Nancy Lene Wu is not only a poet, she is a true champion for poetry. In 2015, she was named a PEN America Emerging Voice. In 2019, she was named a Professional Fellow for the Arts Council for Long Beach. She's the author of 2 chapbooks and many, many, many more poems besides. But even more tireless than her own writing is her work in building and preserving a poetry community, both here in Long Beach and more broadly. She's, over the last decade, she's continually organized readings, workshops, classes, and she's even put together her own poetry press. In fact, when we conducted this interview, which was a very straightforward Q&A kind of thing, this was the early days of the COVID-19 crisis, and she was already scrambling to put together a virtual open mics to keep the poetry community engaged during this time of crisis. So sit back and enjoy this interview with Nancy Lene Wu. Nancy Lene Wu, hello.
Hi.
You are a professional artist fellow for the Arts Council for Long Beach. You have a column on literature for the Long Beach Post. You have a whole series of events that you do that we're going to get into later. But before giving stuff that anyone can read off of a CV, the first question I'd like to ask you is, you started writing poetry, you say in one of your bios, at about 8 years old, but you didn't actually accept the condition or something along those lines until about 22. I'm wondering, was there a particular event or epiphany that took place where you embraced yourself as a poet?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, like a lot of artists, well, I believe, first of all, we're all creative no matter who we are, but some people are born, I think, with a certain propensity towards a certain art. I think I just happen to have the condition of being a poet. But I didn't really know that was a real thing in the world. It was actually moving to Long Beach after I graduated from UC Santa Cruz that I encountered a thriving literary scene, like real live poets with real live books doing real live things. So it was actually a series of moments, meeting a lot of people in Long Beach who kind of just opened my eyes to this community and this world. And I mean, Long Beach happens to be a very welcoming space for new people. So I just kind of jumped in, and there was a certain moment actually when I was about 22 when I realized that I felt so alive when I was in the flow state of writing poetry, different than anything else I'd ever felt in my entire life. And I just realized, like I had at the same moment with yoga, I was like, okay, I'm just going to be doing this for the rest of my life.
So you were writing poetry because you said that you would be writing poetry, you'd get in the flow state. And so was the writing of poetry, you started doing some writing, like I think most of us do, very young. And then was it the exposure to other poets, other people, that changed a practice that you already have been engaging in for 14 some odd years?
Yeah, actually. I mean, I've talked with a lot of people about the act of producing creatively, and we know there's a solitary component to it. But I really, for me, opened up when I got that feedback from other people, like people witnessing my work, seeing eyes on my pages, hearing me, and it was kind of like a validation, if you will, like, hey, I see you, I hear you, you have something to say, you have maybe a little bit of talent, and it was that kind of nurturing and fostering for my community that really allowed me to flourish, really.
Now, I don't know if you remember this, but you and I first encountered each other at, this is, I guess, what qualifies as back in the day now. It might have been, I don't know what years this were. There was a salon that used to take place.
Yeah.
I can remember, I don't remember who held it, but I can remember there was sort of like a little sort of very, very low stage, like 6 inches, and we kind of would line up around the front of the stage, and people would share various things. Was that one of the first sort of events where you got that support?
That salon was in 2000, started in 2013, which was the same year that I basically found the Long Beach poetry community. And yeah, it was like a flood opened. And at that point, I realized as much as I received so much from my community support, I also wanted to provide that for other people. So that was just a little little salon that I did at my house with my roommate, Alex Haddock, who's a wonderful musician in her own right. And it was really open to any art. So the rule was just bring whatever you have. Like, it can be an experiment, work in progress. We just cheer, we have a good time. And that was the kind of, we've been doing those off and on over the years. You know, life gets in the way sometimes, but yeah, that those are some of my favorite things in my life.
I didn't remember that was your salon, and that was how long?
And that was the fun thing about the community is you never know who's going to show up. I mean, someone tells someone else, and word of mouth, and then you've got all these wonderful creative people just hanging out doing their thing.
How long had you been living in Long Beach at that time?
About 2 years at that point. Yeah. Plugged in real quick, I guess.
So what motivated you to start that salon?
Yes. So much yes to that. It was me and my roommate. It was a New Year's Eve resolution, actually, that we wanted to spend more time being creative because we were both a little bit shy. We were, closeted artists, if you will. She was a musician, and we just encouraged each other back and forth. And we decided that we loved encouraging each other so much that we would just open that up to anybody else who we thought might enjoy that same kind of encouragement. So yeah, it started as just me and a friend being like, hey, thumbs up to what you're doing. Should we just give more thumbs up to what everybody else is doing? And then it just really grew from there. Because it turns out we all, I think, no matter what level of professionalism we are in our creative world, or whether we're just starting, I think it feels good, and it does something really uplifting for the soul when you're able to share yourself freely in a room with other people and just be seen. And that's actually a lot of what my work has centered around, that idea.
There's a quote that you on bio on your website. You talk about you quote Robert Carr saying that poets repeat the same prayer with different words. And you say that your prayer is that you wish to empower grace. Could you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, so what I feel happens in those rooms that you've been in and that are in some of my other poetry workshops and other stuff is a sense of, like I said, upliftedness. We sort of are able to come together and create a space where we can let go of some of our petty humanness, which, we all have, and that's a part of being alive. But coming together creates this sort of, I feel, otherworldly experience. And the empowering part is important to me because I want to empower that sense of creativity. For me, and I'm just going to say this is my personal relationship to creativity, it's from a source beyond me. It's not the ego deciding, I'm going to do this. It's more like opening up to a channel of energy, creativity, the muse, like whatever you want to call it. Different people have different names. And that channel is where our inspiration and our creativity, our creative thinking, our solutions to innovative innovative solutions to problems. I believe that's where it comes from, and I call that grace, and that's what I wish to empower through the spaces that I hold.
When did you first put together some sort of poetry exclusive event?
Ooh, I think that was also 2013. 2013 was a big year. I ended up working with a friend, Sarah Thursday, who is a wonderful poet here in Long Beach. Mm-hmm. And we joined forces to create, we each started our own press, basically. And she started Sadie Girl Press, which publishes Long Beach poets. And I started Lucid Moose Lit, which it was one of my projects that is now on permanent hiatus, but it was a social justice-based literary press. And I don't know what was the first event, but in that general time frame, we hosted readings to celebrate those books that we were publishing. For Lucid Moose, we were publishing anthologies of poetry, prose, and art that looked at different social topics, such as feminine identity and poverty.
Since you mentioned social justice, that's a good transition, because where's my, sorry, I'm having a little note problem here.
Good, we just go with the flow.
So what is so this interest in social justice, because this is something that is central to your poetry. Does the interest in social justice predate your identifying yourself as a poet, or vice versa, or what?
Yeah, actually the social justice part came first. And UC Santa Cruz, I studied sociology. And as some people may know, Santa Cruz has been labeled, one of the most liberal schools in America and all that good stuff. So my education was very specifically focused on social justice. And I graduated college not really knowing what to do with all this knowledge and information. So when I came back to Long Beach and I sort of floated around, I found the poetry community. Lucid Moose was actually the first moment I felt that click of like, oh, this thing can meet this thing, social justice can meet the arts. And I've just been doing my best to incorporate social justice principles of equity for all in our social systems in my personal work as an artist and as an organizer. And it's taken a lot of different forms over the years, and I practice it as best I can.
On that note, this would be, if you don't mind, I think this would be a good time to actually have, we've been talking about your poetry, to actually hear something. There's a poem that you sent me called Exquisite Corpse that I'd love for you to read.
Sure. So for anybody who doesn't know, first of all, Exquisite Corpse is a type of communal poem, actually written by committee. We don't usually write poems by committee, but this one is. It's a game, and everyone writes one line, passes it on to the next person, and they write another line, so it becomes a group poem. This is called Exquisite Corpse, with an epigraph by Percival Everett, and he says, "A point is only location. And isn't that what we are? Mere points? Some points suggest beginnings, some ends, all divide, and when they connect or divide, where they are defined, it is always because of a turn, an angle, a shift toward another plane. One point lies neatly packaged in an American history book. Red bean soup is another point. One point is tea, cultivated 350 AD. Europe is a whole set of points, a cat's cradle. Another is the Kunlun Mountains, abode of the gods. The Silk Road rests at a perpendicular angle to blue tiles in Mazatlan. A Lamborghini lies tangent to apartheid. The roar of jets overhead, a cloud of points. Plato's lungs, a mosque, and the Star of David form a parabola. Hunger stretches into a plain of brittle grass. McDonald's and Walmart, a web, red where they connect. Ferguson, Missouri rests on a long rope of turns, tight around too many necks. Exclusion acts are points and also the negation of points. Language is the yellow river, isn't it? A mouth always leads to an ocean. A man's shout echoes, forms an obtuse angle with the black of the street, while someone says grace behind closed doors. The definition of mythology reads like the contours of a sand desert, reshaping and reshaping. Who the land belongs to, a stone on every immigrant's tongue. Thousands of points and thousands of stomachs. Like a kindergartner, I start drawing lines outside of lines. Pass the paper, off to you. The crown of your head opens like a lotus.
That's nice. One of the things I like about that poem particularly is a lot of social justice poetry, and I categorize this as that, but in a different way than a lot of social justice poetry. A lot of social justice poetry is very heavy, angry, and on the nose, and which I'm not saying is anything wrong with that. I think there's actually a place for that. But this one, I think this poem speaks heavily to social justice, and yet lots of it isn't about that specifically. It just kind of, speaking of points, it kind of different points, and then it hits one on the nose, Ferguson, the immigrants, but it just kind of skips by. And is that always your approach when you incorporate social justice ideas, to kind of not be completely hitting it on the head constantly?
Yeah. I mean, my personal style and aesthetic as a poet is, I mean, at this point in my development as a writer, I try to be imagistic primarily. As a poet, I want to write memorably, but I also recall, I think it was Ezra Pound who said it's better to produce one image in a lifetime than it is to produce voluminous works. So just as a practice, I do prefer aesthetically to wrap these issues into my writing, fold them in, like you said, without being super on the nose. I just think that I enjoy poetry that helps me experience and feel things without being, like, I definitely agree there's a point and a place for that angry and kind of on the nose poetry, and I just don't write like that. I write a little bit more, I mean, honestly, a little bit more spiritually, I guess. Like, I kind of like to open up into that other world. And I think that our social justice issues are definitely a part. Those two things are linked for me. But that's where I gravitate.
And how much of your
audience? Question from the audience?
Yes, please. You sir, in the hat and glasses.
Yes, okay. Hi, my name's Marco. And so I heard in an interview that you gave for Palacio, and you'll correct me if I'm misquoting you, but you were talking about before you presented a poem to the world, you would let it heal itself first. Is that correct?
Yes,
okay.
Yes, much, yes.
And you referred to the energies or the muse. So let's talk, let's say the muse. So what's the interplay between the muse, yourself, and the poem itself? Because in a way you're obviously channeling or working with the muse, but then at some point the poem takes over and takes care of itself. So do you mind talking about that process? Is it?
I wouldn't mind. I love talking about that.
Okay, good. Go for it.
Thank you. Yeah. So what's the interplay between the muse, myself, and the poem? And where does, I heard the word healing happen in there. I approach poetry as a healing process for myself, I have these experiences and these thoughts and these feelings like all of us do as humans. And some of them I think are too big for me as one single unit of humanity to understand or to solve or to grapple with. It'd be totally egotistical to think that I, think that way. So I just kind of let it go. I hand it off, if you will, like an idea or the beginning of a poem, something that I'm wrestling with. That's most of the work, honestly, of being an artist for myself, is getting to that space where I can open up to allow the words, the wisdom, the insight, the images to flow through me. I mean, yes, it feels like being a channel. And when I'm able to access those moments, that's when I feel the best writing comes out. And then, of course, you have your critical side, which is very important in its place. It's important to bring the critic in when you're ready to revise and you're ready to shape the thing that came out as this, mumbling mess of garbage from the universe, So they interplay together, and it does feel very healing. I mean, I know that poetry has been one of my primary ways of healing for myself personally. And then I also believe, and this is why as an organizer and where social justice comes into play, I think there's so much that wants healing, in our personal lives, in our social lives, in our political lives, and all these different spaces. And poetry can be a tool for that.
Thank you.
Good question, sir. Something else you say in your one of your bios is you talk about the role of what you call social entrepreneurship, and I'd love to hear you talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so I am the type of artist that also happens to be an entrepreneur, and I happen to also be a social entrepreneur, which for me, that means I am not just focused on building profit. I am focused on building community and on building a triple bottom line, if you will. If anyone has heard that, it's profit, social justice, and environmental justice. So working all of these things into anything that I create. So, I run my own business, and I've co-founded about 5 different nonprofit organizations here in Long Beach, each with sort of their own angle or focus. And honestly, it's a compulsion, just like poetry is. Like, I can't not do this. So as soon as the poetry flower started blooming, in my life, I realized this aspect of who I am, which is a social builder. I just like those salons, just like these poetry workshops, whatever it is, that is what I feel that I am called to do. So I just do it, and it takes different shapes and different forms, and it kind of feels like every year I'm doing something different. But if I look back on my life, there's always a through line going through it, and I just follow. Honestly, I just follow the way where it goes.
So, although poetry might have had its origins in like in the bards, Homer, and that kind of thing, in the oral tradition, I think most of us in the West, especially, when we our exposure to poetry and our education in poetry is much more of poetry as a solipsistic endeavor. It's an artist, at a table with a pen or a computer or a candle and a quill, and going hours trying to get exactly the right phrase, the right word. And although there are various sort of ways that someone can construct an exquisite corpse, as you said before, or there's all kinds of ways that someone could come up with to create poetry collaboratively. For the most part, for the vast majority of us, poetry, the creation of it, is solipsistic. There's a solipsistic streak that runs consistently through most poets this is a long way of getting into the question I want to ask is, for you, is there any tension, good, bad, whatever, between this solipsistic endeavor being deep in your soul and this strong urge toward the social justice, social entrepreneurship?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I mean, I think the whole Descartes, I think therefore I am situation that has influenced so much of, you know, what you're saying is kind of like our Western solipsistic view, which is like, I am a thinking being, and from my thinking being head, you know, I exist. There's other ways of looking at it. You know, Eastern traditions have a lot more of a sense of communal, you know, connection. Not an expert by any means, just know that there are, you know, other ways of thinking about what consciousness is. And that's what we're talking about really, is where consciousness comes through in the form of a poem. You know, you could also say art, music, dance, whatever it is. And yes, there is a tension because I exist in a single human body. That's not debatable. But I also feel like I encounter a different level of consciousness when I am interacting with people in a group creatively. So though my poems might come wherever they come from and come through this hand, you know, I don't think that they exist by themselves. I mean, they definitely exist with input from other people. And yeah, I don't know. I don't know what else to say about that. Just there's definitely some tension and some interaction, but consciousness at the end of the day is this thing that we're all exploring, which is so fascinating in the different forms that it takes. And you know, I have more questions than answers, honestly.
I have a question, sort of, that's not gonna.
Yes, sir. Just go you, sir, in the hat and glasses with the dog that sometimes comes around.
Yeah. You were talking about the interaction, you know, with the people who are receiving your poetry. And somebody asked me the other day, why is it that I find poetry precious? And I think because it requires a deeper reading, if you will. But nowadays, I think we are doing so much because of technology and the amount of reading we do through technology. We do a lot of spotty reading, where it's almost like bad, how do you say, speed reading, where we just look at a phrase, we absorb it, we move on because we have to move on to the next text. And do you think, you know, poetry, which requires one to really sink in to language, do you think there's the risk that poetry might slowly become more and more shallow, if you will? You know, the well is not as deep anymore because people aren't willing to plunge or dive in quite as deeply. And is the poet then at risk of compromising the art form itself, or is that just a new form of progression?
I love that question. That's so interesting. I think both, yes, and. Short form is the way that we're reading things online, you know, Twitter posts, etc. Actually, I think poetry lends itself well to that because people have shorter attention spans. Actually, it might be easier to read a one-page poem than it could be to read a whole novel. I mean, honestly, I don't know when the last time is I read an actual full novel, but that's just me. I read poetry. And also, I think that there's not, I don't think there's a risk of the well running out. I think the well is whatever the well is, it is, and it's deep and it's there and we all have access to it. And I think it's a matter of whether, well, we're able to help, well, for me, I can say whether I'm able to usher people into the well, sounds really bad, push them into the well, but no, you know, like invite people to experience that. I think that there is a tendency for a lot of poetry to be very confessional. I mean, in the 20th century, confessional poetry, which is like kind of narrative, like, you know, Bukowski style, like conversational type of poetry, really kind of flourished. And we do see a lot of that. But I think poetry, like any art form, if you really study it, there is such a wide variety of styles and aesthetics. And I think that if somebody does encounter a gateway poem, if you will, and that helps them access these deeper levels of thinking, or language as this conduit for exploring consciousness. I think there's only good that can come of that. Like Mary Oliver said, a poem is a mystic document. So again, where the human and the mystical interact. A poem can be like a, forgive my D&D tendencies here, but like a magical scroll that you can read and enter into another world that we'll have access to.
This would be a good place, I think, to talk about, for you to talk about some of the many poetry sort of groups that you facilitate. I don't know how many you want to go into, and I'm sure that we'll have some kind of link to your webpage and bio, and so that people will be able to see details of this stuff. But I'd love for you to talk about some of the things that you're facilitating right now, particularly as we're in this obviously very weird time. There's no way to conduct an interview now here at the end of March 2020 without talking about the COVID-19 thing that we're all going through. So anything you want to talk about along those lines that's going on right now, that'd be fantastic.
Yeah, so as an organizer, I already lead in-person poetry workshops. So I had one actually coming up in April that, obviously because we're inside now, I actually have transferred to a virtual format. So like Zoom is the new craze right now. I'm hosting a virtual poetry workshop on Zoom. It's generative, and it is witness rather than critique based. So as a professional writer, I know the place of critique and how important it is to revision. But I also know the importance of holding space for anybody to express themselves and to write. So I'm going to be providing a prompt, and then people will go home and they'll write a poem and they'll bring it back, and then we'll share what we liked about it, what it made us think about, without the level of critique that, say an MFA workshop might bring, which I think is really great to open up writing. I have a sister circle that I'm running. It's not actually poetry or writing based, but all the things we're talking about, which is holding space, meeting yourself and others where you're at, witnessing, listening without judgment is a very healing process. That's what we do a lot of the time in poetry workshops. And I have a weekly circle for anyone who identifies with that sort of space on Thursdays. And I'm planning a virtual poetry open mic. We don't have the details up yet, but they will be soon for anyone to, well, we'll have a couple of features. We'll have 6 features actually from Long Beach, sponsored by the Arts Council. And that will be rolling out in April as well. I think that's good for right now. I mean, I'm definitely trying to transition all of my activities online, and I just think this is a time when we're all recognizing first of all, the value of technology and connecting us, and second of all, that we might be struggling or going through what we're going through, but we're all still very connected. So I'm creating some spaces for people who want to connect in those ways. And quick thing, just a shout out to some of the organizations that have been a huge influence in my life that are also social justice focused. I had a fellowship with PEN America in 2015, and they're doing, great work, social justice at the heart of their mission. And I'm in an MFA program right now with Antioch University here in LA, which also has social justice at their mission. So, they have greatly informed and helped me do the work that I'm doing. And again, to the value of community, I feel like we're all out here doing our part, helping each other. I might play this one role in the work that I'm doing, and I know that I'm connected to all the other people playing their role in the work that they're doing for equity, for justice, for greater well-being for everybody, regardless of economic situation or race or ethnicity or sexual preference or gender, all of these different things that we're all really at the heart of poetry and everything I do. is that we're all human and we're all connected and we're all in this together. We're here on this planet, and there's nothing, I think, more, I don't know, sobering than a global pandemic to help us remember every single day that we are connected to each other, and we have a responsibility to ourselves and our neighbors to take care of each other on a, personal level as well as a social and political level. And I know I talk a lot about, the arts. I believe that, as we've talked about, the arts and social justice are intimately connected, because the more that you can access your own sense of agency and empowerment and expression, the more that we as individuals may find ourselves connecting with others to do things to change our social systems. So just to kind of put a pin in that, I feel like that's how I see the arts and social justice being connected.
I can't think of a better note to close on. Nancy Lene Wu, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.